What does it mean to return home? When home can never, ever feel the same because there's someone really important who's always going to be missing. When the home that you return to feels so empty, yet feels so heavy with the weight of the grief, and that grief being the love that you hold for those who are gone. Welcome back to Death on the Daily, and in today's episode, we're going to be exploring just this through my personal story. Now, this is part 2 in me and the spirit of my darling daughter telling her story. As I shared in the last episode, and if you haven't checked out that episode, maybe that's the place to go and start. In the last episode, we spoke to her journey into this world, her very short journey into this world, because I became pregnant and then tragically 5 months into pregnancy found out that she had a birth defect that was not compatible with life earthside. A birth defect called encephalocele, where the back of her skull hadn't formed properly, and therefore the prognosis was that she could at best only live 36 hours outside of the womb. So we went through prior to our experience, the unimaginable. We went through what's called a termination for medical reasons, and we said goodbye to her after she was born on the 2nd of September in 2023 through stillbirth. So in today's episode, I want to unpack the second part of this story. I feel really passionately through Death on the Daily about the power when we share our stories, because for those of us who are going through really painful and really difficult losses and any and all forms of grief, us knowing that there are others out there who have walked this path, us understanding that it is, as much as death is pushed into the shadows, this is a part of the human experience. For me, I found that could bring me heaps of comfort. But more broadly, the more stories of death that I have connected into, the more I've spoken to people, the more I've held space for people, the more memoirs that I've read about death and grief, the more that I really understand the wide range of human experiences that we do go through in this space, that humans have walked for millennia. And in me bearing witness to other stories, what I found is that it's increased my empathy for others. I've therefore been able to be there much more for people in my life. So I definitely see the importance of this, of us sharing our stories. And as I shared in the last episode, since the first episode of my podcast, I haven't given our daughter, Ngākau Raiona, her own episode. So instead of 1, I'm giving her 2 episodes. So this is the second part. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at our journey, that of myself and my husband, as well as obviously our daughter's spirit, from the point at which we returned back from the hospital after her stillbirth with our empty arms, with no daughter with us, and then forwards into our grief pathway beyond. And I want to start this episode as I did the last episode, just by checking in with myself. Let's check in with you as well. So if you want to join me, just put your hand to your heart. And just, if it's comfortable to do so, you can connect into your breath. Then we just take a breath together. If connecting into your breath isn't comfortable, you can just feel the warmth of your hand. In fact, I'd recommend everyone feel the warmth of your hand. I can feel mine right now. And whatever your story is, and however death and grief interconnects into your story, if it's feeling really fresh and really raw, I'm sending love. If you're helping anyone to navigate their own journey, I'm sending love. And with this connection and with this presence, let's go forwards into my forwards path beyond the death of my daughter. So where to start? I haven't scripted these episodes. And that feels really important to me, because I think there's something in our storytelling when it's just raw, it's just open, it's flowing. And where I do want to begin in today's episode is that moment where my husband, Jordan, and we came back through the front door, back home from the hospital. So it was Saturday lunchtime, and we ended in the last episode talking about all of the rituals that I'd just done, that my husband had joined in for as well, with our daughter, who was just so beautiful, looking just like her daddy, exactly as I knew she was going to. And we'd given her so many kisses, we'd bathed her, we'd put her in a beautiful little outfit that was made by volunteers who create tiny little clothes for babies who are prematurely stillborn. And we'd, in my perspective, done, I suppose, everything that I would have wished to have done to honor her in that moment. Cherished memories that were so, so beautiful. And then we left the hospital, we left her, which was one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do in my life, leaving my daughter behind, leaving my daughter in stillness behind. And so with that final kiss and final song that I sang to her, we had a little affirmation song, and we said goodbye. And I said, we're going to see you soon, because we were going to be burying her as soon as her post-mortem and genetics testing had all been completed. And we left the hospital. And we left the hospital with a box, a memory box, all of our bags, and nothing else. A big empty space, arms wanting to hold a baby and carry her out. And walking past the maternity ward, we obviously walked past heaps of grandparents with the baby seat and all of those things that just made my heart break even more. So we went back home, and walking through the doors, our home that I had for the previous 5 months of pregnancy been really, really picturing our daughter. In fact, prior to that, all the time, prior to her coming in, I'd pictured her being here. I'd pictured this room actually where I filmed my podcast would have been her nursery, and will hopefully one day be a nursery for our children. But that of coming back, and of the maternity clothes that I just started to buy secondhand, and of the little bits and pieces that start to be passed down through friends and family members, etc., of baby stuff. We came home to a house that just would never feel the same, because there was always going to be someone who was missing. There was always going to be our beautiful, darling daughter who was missing. And that was always, and does still, hurt. So I want to really speak to my grief and the forwards path that I navigated through. And I want to speak to this because I think that there's such a perception within our society that a couple of weeks after a loss, you should get over it. Typically, I think people have a lot of care and attention with them through to the funeral, and everything and everyone just dissipates. And I'm very thankful that I've had a few friends who have really, really stuck with me for a long period after, and still talking about her, saying her name. I'm so proud of our little girl. I want to talk to her all day, every day. Even if tears come, especially if tears come, I want to be talking about her, because she is my pride and joy. She's the most beautiful little being that I've ever laid eyes on. And the first thing that I just want to speak to is the power of speaking, and how many people gave me the gift of their shoulder to cry on, their ear to listen to me, including my darling cousin Kira, who drove over, and we were just swearing. It's not effing fair, shaking our fist at the sky. How could you do this? She really matched me in the anger that I felt, for example, on that day. And she was constantly checking in with me. She was constantly calling me. Equally, I have a dear friend, Christiana, who was doing exactly the same. We talked about it actually in episode 2 of this podcast, the little check-ins that she'd do for me on WhatsApp every single day with no expectation of any response from me. She'd just check in and say, "Hey, sweet pea, how you doing? What's going on?" Or she'd ask me a question. She's a coach, much like I am. So she'd ask me a question that invited me to reflect on how I was feeling, with the space for me to be able to reply and say, "I feel effing terrible right now." I don't know how I'm going to be able to cope today. Today is awful. And obviously I had my wonderful husband as well. And we just talked and we talked and we talked and we cried, and he let me cry and bawl my eyes out. And he's still there like a shot whenever I need him. And there is real power in community. I believe that community is one of the greatest sources of our happiness, of our contentment, of our well-being as humans. Without community, where do we go? We just sort of bobble around in our own little isolated bubble. And I think that in our world, we've become a very individualistic world. So I do think there's challenges when it comes to people knowing who they can reach out to in times of crisis, and particularly because we've also become really bad at showing our vulnerabilities. And I hold my own hands up there because I'm still working on showing up and being vulnerable. I know through this podcast, I do obviously show up quite vulnerably and openly, but there's still spaces where I don't feel like I can, or I feel like I have to put a brave face on. It's all really subconscious, but I'm constantly just calling myself out on that. But I think in the first few days after she died, the most powerful memories for me come through me being able to tell my story. And actually, we know this in grief work. And the key to this really is how we let someone just recount and recount and recount again and again and again their story, because actually there's a processing that's happening. It's a requirement. So I had really wonderful friends where I could just tell the story again and again and again. And actually each time that I did, it was painful. It brought a lot of tears, but it also flooded me with the joyful memories of just her beautiful face, how exquisite she looked, a little Maori princess, how much she looked like her daddy, all of that. So one thing that I just really wanted to highlight as I'm sharing this story is, if you are supporting anyone in grief, just let them speak their truth again and again and again if needed. It's so cathartic. And actually I found that every time I unpacked it, there were other memories that I'd forgotten, particularly in moments of shock, that I could then bring back through into the fold. And the people in my life, and I appreciate that obviously maybe not everyone would want to do this, but for me, the people who are also like, oh, my cousin was like, oh, I want to see the pictures of her. Let me see. So I showed her pictures and she was like, oh my goodness, she's gorgeous. My brother did the same, and it was just wonderful. So in those particularly those first few days, but also beyond then, that was so precious. And I remember my friend Christiana every single day checking in. And at the end of the month, she said, I'm not going to check in every day unless you want me to. I'm going to check in less regularly. And that was really beautiful as well, by way of her preparing me for that moment where she was going to step back, but also with that invitation. If you want me to be here, I still will be here. I'm here for you. So those first few days were obviously really, really painful. But what was interesting, and I shared this in the last episode, that when I was in the hospital and I was going through the birth contractions, I really integrated the lesson of impermanence, because I realized the searing, raw pain of those birth contractions, that eventually they dissipate. There is not a birth contraction that is gonna last forever, thank God. And I realized in that moment that actually that mirrored what I'd been feeling in the past few days through my grief, that there were moments where I felt like I was on my hands and knees. I felt like someone was just kicking me in the stomach continually. I felt like I was shattering into a million pieces and didn't know how to pick them up and put them back together to make me as a whole human ever again. But there were also moments that felt clearer, that felt more normal, that felt really quite beautiful and poignant, that felt purposeful. For example, as I was writing our daughter's birth and death plan, which was much more difficult in the avoidance before than it was actually in the writing of the story on the other side, there was a real impermanence of everything in I don't want to say, it's interesting saying good, but I will say good, in what felt good / better, and what felt just the depths of the horrors of the situation. Everything was impermanent. And that continued beyond the hospital, as we came home, the feeling of just absolute emptiness, the rawness of the grief, that dissipated and moved from tears into anger, into searing rage, moved into feeling kind of normal, being able to get about, doing little bits and bobs, packing away stuff. For example, my maternity clothes and the little bits and bobs that we'd gathered for her, all were going to go up into the loft, waiting for our next baby to come into this world. And there's a model of grief that's called the dual process model, and it was created by Strobe and Schutt. And what it talks about is you've got loss-oriented processing, which is where you're feeling the full force of your grief. And then you've got the restoration-oriented processing, where maybe you're doing things in the rebuild of your life afterwards. And there's a natural oscillation between the two. And I could really feel that oscillation. But with that oscillation also came the realization that everything in life is impermanent, including my darkest of days. And that was a real light bulb moment, because actually through my journaling that my husband encouraged me to do from basically the point of Ngākau Raiona's diagnosis, I was writing everything down. He said, you love writing, capture it all. And he actually sat with me as well. It was really beautiful. I remember after we came back from the hospital and I wanted to capture everything around her birth. I didn't want to forget one detail, because I was so effing proud of me and my daughter. I was literally like, she's amazing, I'm amazing, Jordan's amazing. I think all of the hormones of pregnancy and birth, I had probably those hormones that a new mother has by way, when there's a living child, by way of the bonding hormones and everything. They're all coursing through me alongside the grief. And so there was a lot of meaning, and there was so much to be captured. So Jordan actually sat with me, and I would definitely say, if, again, for anyone who is supporting someone who's been through a really big loss, if they like journaling, definitely, this could be a really powerful space for you and them to go into. It can be really hard to put pen to paper when you've just been through it. But I know that having my husband sat next to me, encouraging me, us smiling in a griefy way, obviously, with our heart breaking at the same time, but smiling as we were looking at pictures of our absolutely beautiful and exquisite darling daughter, and recounting all of the memories, and him saying, do you remember when your waters broke? And we both went, oh my goodness, that was a real moment. And do you remember when we first saw her? Was so profoundly beautiful. So I was doing heaps and heaps of writing. But in that writing, what I realized is that the impermanence, I don't want to say regular pattern of grief, but I personally did experience quite a regular pattern. And I definitely know that's not for everyone. This is just something that I observed, was that my natural way of processing grief was I had one really effing terrible, worst day of my life level of terrible, could barely get out of bed. Jordan had to sort of drag me out of the house to go on, I love my nature walks. Jordan had to drag me out of the house to go on my nature walks. I was getting really angry when we were out there. I remember kicking piles of dirt and Jordan cracking up, or I'd pick up like a stick and I would throw it because I was feeling really weak. And to be honest, I probably am quite weak, but because I was feeling really weak after giving birth and being so depleted from that, the stick would go about a foot in front of me, and just wasn't quite the angry crescendo that was in my mind. I was in my mind the Incredible Hulk doing the Hulk smash or something like that. But there were those days. And then on the other side, I always had a day where things felt okay. I'm not going to say they felt good. They felt great, but they felt okay. And on those days, I actually felt really flooded with love and with meaning. And those were the days where I could sit at the kitchen table and I could write, and I could just allow my grief to flow out onto the page, and I could start to process it. So for the next few weeks after her birth, it was basically just cocooning. When I work with people in the grief space, and I do a lot of holding space for loss in my work, in my coaching practice, and I'm actually at the moment I've started a 6-month certification to become a fully certified grief coach. But I know how painful it can be by way of the expectations of society on us to get back to normal, to get back to work. And when I speak to clients and I hold space for loss and I talk about cocooning, and that I believe a bit like the caterpillar going into the chrysalis. And I actually talked about this on a podcast that was all about reconnecting to nature with my nature coach, Maria Deutsch. And we spoke about the caterpillar and the chrysalis and how the caterpillar, when it goes into the chrysalis, it literally turns into goo. It dissolves. The metamorphosis into a butterfly is a really extreme transformation. Literally imagine yourself dissolving into goo. Well, for those weeks, I felt like that. I felt, particularly on those terrible days, I felt like little eyeballs just swimming in a puddle of goo. But the greatest gift that I gave to myself was giving myself space. So I had already messaged all of my clients before Ngākau Raiona's stillbirth, and I said, I don't know when I'm going to be back. I've been through a big bereavement. I will explain all someday, but probably for the next 3-4 weeks, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do our sessions. And all of my clients were so supportive. They were just wonderful. And I know that that's not what a lot of people can do. I think that particularly in corporates, bereavement leave is just terrible. And the fact that actually it's only just now that in the UK, legislation is making miscarriage acknowledged as a bereavement and not as something where you should just ask if you could get sick leave is really, really important. So I know that I had that gift, and that time to cocoon was just wonderful. So if you're going through bereavement, whatever the time that you can take off of work, and I appreciate that everybody's got different circumstances, I would just say, where else can you cocoon? Are there other areas where you can put boundaries up and you can say, actually, I'm not going to be socializing. I'm not going to be, I don't know, seeing my family or whatever it is on these weekends where I have to leave the house. I just want to have as much time cocooning and nurturing and nourishing myself as possible. And for me, that period of cocooning was really, really important. Not only because in that time we were also preparing for a burial, but from an emotional perspective, I just needed space. I needed time to just sit and stare in space, to go out for a walk, to have time distracting myself, watching something on Netflix, to diving into some new books that were all about grief and that really, really helped and supported me, as well as having many, many conversations and seeing friends and going for walks as and when I felt like I had the energy to do so. It was the greatest gift that I could give myself. And I mentioned that in that time we were preparing for her Woodland burial. So she had gone off to Great Ormond Street Hospital, and she had gone off with the little letters and stuff that we'd written for her. And she'd gone off for all of the genetic testing and all of that stuff, just so that we could get some answers to help support our forwards path. But also what I'm really proud of, and it makes me so happy, is that when I ticked the box at the hospital that I was happy for part of her, the genetics testing, her samples to be used for research to support helping babies in the future. That was a part of her legacy, and I really connected into that. And with my daughter, one of the big levers for me to feel like she is still of this world, she's still living it with me, is very much her legacy. How can I create her legacy, of which this podcast is one, but of which ticking that box was very much one. How can I support others? And so Jordan and I, we started the process of preparing for her burial. And I was speaking to my dear friend Kelly, and she mentioned that her dad is buried at a woodland burial place that's near where we live. It's in a forest. It's absolutely beautiful. And she said, "Oh, why don't you go check them out?" And I thought, okay, this sounds interesting. So I contacted them, and what was really interesting actually was they have what's called the butterfly garden, and they actually give the burial plots for free, which really made my heart just fill with joy, because I thought, for how many parents are going through this who have that just precious gifts and that generosity, that acknowledgement that it shouldn't happen like this. This shouldn't be the point when you're burying your darling daughter. So Jordan and I went to check out the Woodland burial site, and it's a place called Green Acres, and it was absolutely wonderful. Just beautiful. The butterfly garden is just such a gorgeous place because you've got babies who are in a circle. And I just love the thought that it's almost like a baby creche where they can all be together and they can all be celebrated. And so we went to check out the burial site and were met by the absolutely amazing team there. And I have to shout out the team. It was Lisa, Tracy and Adrian who on the day made the day so special, and Lisa in the run up to it. But we went and we chose Ngākau Raiona's burial spot. It was under a beautiful, beautiful tree. And it just felt, it felt absolutely, utterly devastating. Obviously, I was in floods of tears. Jordan was shedding tears as we were choosing the plot and as we were speaking through everything and just doing things that felt so surreal, of filling in all the forms for what was going to be our daughter's burial. But it was made so much better by the kindness and the generosity of all of the team there. And so we flowed through the next few weeks, basically getting prepared for her Woodland burial and for that call to say she's ready. She's back at Whips Cross Hospital now. And we eventually got the call. It was, I think, a couple of weeks later, and we booked in for her Woodland burial 1 week after that, which I didn't actually know, but her Woodland burial was on the last day of summer officially per the equinoxes, because it was the autumn equinox the day after her burial. And I just thought that was so beautiful because she was a summer baby. I found out that I was pregnant at the start of May. And then the last day of summer, I put her back into the earth. And so there were lots of little touches for her Woodland burial, and I'd been in planning mode. So I'd got her measurements to be able to have, there's this beautiful, beautiful company called Bella Couche, and it's these little handmade cocoons, I think they're called, that are made for babies. And so I had one of them, beautiful brown earthy felt. And I started to plan as well in those weeks before her Woodland burial. What do we want to do? How do we want to honor her? I'd written out my little speeches, and I had some, I think there was a Rumi poem in there I'd written from my heart. It was just absolutely gorgeous. And then I'd asked my husband, who's Maori, if he would speak a few words in Maori. And he said, yeah, maybe. We'll see. And I was fine with that because I was like, actually, maybe he doesn't want to. We'll see on the day. So we kept that little bit open. And as we flowed through to it, then I started to connect into nature. So I cultivate a deep connection with nature in a lot of my work. It's all about helping my clients to reconnect to nature and to create a co-creational relationship with nature. So I had a few plants that had been quite meaningful in this pregnancy journey. The first one was the buddleia plant in our garden. Buddleia, also known as butterfly bush. These beautiful purple sprigs of flowers that just smell absolutely divine. And the butterfly bush had really flourished during our pregnancy. I think a seed must have dropped into our garden. It just came through and then suddenly it was just there. It's a massive bush. And I'd only really noticed it properly in that year of my pregnancy journey with Ngākau Raiona. And every day through the summer after the flowers bloomed, I would stand outside, I'd ground, there's a willow tree in our garden, so I'd speak to willow, and I would smell one of the flowers and I just inhale it in. So it was really meaningful for both of us. And so I asked the buddleia bush because it was the end of, it was towards the end of September, and I could see that we were getting to the final blooms. And I said, please, please, please give me one final bloom. Because actually that was the bush as well that I mentioned in the last episode. I took a sprig of flower in so that I could have it next to her and forevermore have that smell associated with the time that we spent with our darling daughter, the precious little bit of time that we got to hold her. So it's absolutely beautiful. And Then I also asked, there was a marigold plant that was literally growing through cracks in the pavement, which is actually the inspiration for my current business name, which is called Green in the Grey, actually a name that I'm soon to retire. But the inspiration for my business name was about plants growing through the cracks in the pavement and how tenacious and resilient they are and how they seize every opportunity for life. So interestingly, as I went into my final month with Ngākau Raiona, I noticed there was a little marigold plant literally growing through the crack in a pavement just down our street. And there's a bloom started coming through. I thought, oh, it's interesting. These blooms, they're bright yellow. I've only known orange marigold plants. So I was watching it. And then obviously we went through her death. And I kept connecting with this plant. And I asked this plant, I said, please, 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 can you give me some blooms for her? I want these blooms for a garland to strand around her neck, to strand around her neck, to hang around her neck. I don't know how you say it. And what was beautiful was the plant on the day of her burial gave me 9. Well, there was more flowers. There was about 20, just over 20 flowers, but I picked 9 beautiful yellow flowers, and I, with needle and thread, threaded them together, made her a beautiful garland to hang around her neck, and took the buddleia sprig. There was one left on that day. And also I'd created her a willow crown. And that was inspired by, in my husband's Māori culture, it's a little bit different to the way that they do it, but there's a tree, I think it's the kawakawa tree, and mourners will wear crowns of the kawakawa branches. And anyone who, actually I need to check that with Jordan afterwards to make sure, I'll do a fact check on that to make sure that I've got that right. I was so inspired by that, but I thought, actually, I don't want to wear the crown. What can I do? What feels in my creativity? Where do I want to go? And inspired by that and seeing those beautiful pictures, I thought, I want to make her a willow crown. And then when her siblings are in on this planet with us, every single year on her birthday, we're going to make willow crowns and we're going to wear them to celebrate our little princess. So I made a beautiful willow crown. I'd asked I'd measured her, or the midwife had measured her when we were in the hospital. So I made her that little willow crown exactly to the size of her head. And on the day of her burial, we were getting ready to go. And I was actually very calm. I didn't know how I was going to be. And I had wonderful peer support at the time from a charity called Sister Circle. And my dear friend Alexa there said to me, just see what comes up. Go with it. She was like, I'm here to support you. But actually for me, again, it was the period before, a bit like my avoidance before writing her birth and death plan. Equally, it was the period before that was much, much worse. And something that was really interesting as well, that I haven't mentioned before in this episode, but I'll share this now and then I'll go back to her beautiful woodland burial, was how me journaling my dreams had helped me to really understand how I was processing her death and processing my grief. So actually, I had noticed I do dream journaling every day. And I'd noticed that in the first week after she died, it was like getting hit by a truck every night when I wake up. And I woke up many times in the night because I'd fall into a blissful sleep and my subconscious hadn't integrated that my daughter had died. So in my sleep, I was blissfully unaware. And then I'd wake up and reality would come crashing down on me like a ton of bricks. Then in week 2, interestingly, I felt a shift. So then I was moving through my dreams and I was really conscious of the fact that she died. So in my dreams, I was mourning, I felt sad, but I was also doing kind of dream-like random things. So it wasn't really rooted in her death per se, but I was moving through those dreams as someone who was bereaved. Then in week 3, I started to process through, and this was, I think it was literally the week of, it would have been the week of her or the week before her woodland burial. I then started to process fears around her burial. So there was one dream where I was literally holding her because I knew I wanted to carry her and I wanted to hold her and take her myself and place her into the earth. And in the dream, I was curled up in the fetal position and I couldn't do it. I was frozen and there was steps down into her grave and I just couldn't take her. And there was other dreams that I had around me losing her en route to, or forgetting to take her to her own burial and all sorts of stuff. So I started to process from that perspective. But on the day I was really feeling quite calm and actually feeling very purposeful by way of, I'm her mama. Again, that promise of presence that I mentioned in the last episode. I promised her that I was going to be here no matter what. That was my promise to her in the car on the way home from the scan that gave us the diagnosis that ultimately meant that she wasn't going to be walking earthside with us. And that promise of presence had continued all the way through to this day, to her Woodland burial. I felt so present, so connected. And so we went off to the hospital. We'd taken our dogs with us, obviously not into the hospital, but in the car, because they were coming to the Woodland burial, obviously on their leads. And they were such a beautiful support in that moment. And Jordan stayed with the dogs in the car. I went into the morgue to collect our baby girl, and with the help of wonderful Rhiannon, again, shout out to Rhiannon at Whipps Cross Hospital, the bereavement midwife there, who's just was such a support and so caring. With her help and with a lot of compassion from the wonderful man who was in the morgue and who met us, I got to spend time with her. I got to see her again. She looked beautiful, slightly changed, but still absolutely beautiful and still looking exactly like her daddy. And I got to put her garland, I got to put the buddleia, I got to put the willow crown on her. I got to put I brought flower petals and leaves and all sorts, and just made her little cocoon that she was in just so, so beautiful. And I got to cry and sit with her. Rhiannon just left me for as long as I wanted. And then Jordan and I were ready. So then I carried her out, and I didn't let go of her until she went into the ground. And we were allowed to do that actually because after 24 weeks, then it's a different process. Basically, she would have been registered for a death. She would have had to have a death certificate, birth and death certificate prior to 24 weeks in the UK. Then it's not the same process. So actually it meant we didn't need a funeral director to come, and I think funeral directors have to be there to sort of, I don't know if it's check out the body, like get the body out of the hospital. And there we were allowed to take her in our car with a piece of paper that basically was from the hospital confirming the circumstances of why we had her and where we were going. So it was a really beautiful, beautiful journey. And I was so happy the dogs, they got to sort of meet her. And I had my hand inside the cocoon. I put my hand on her chest and I was just speaking to her, and I was looking at her. Jordan was looking at her all the way there. It was just truly, truly wonderful. And in the most painful and raw way, when I say this, it's not to say that we weren't grieving, we weren't crying and all of that, but it was really beautiful. And we arrived just before we got to Green Acres. I was speaking to her and I was preparing her, and I was saying, this is our final journey physically together, but we're going to come back and see you. This is where we're going. So I was giving her all of those little cues. And then we got out of the car at Green Acres, and I can feel my tears coming, and that is more than okay. And we got out of the car at Green Acres, and I was rocking her. We met my parents, my brother, and I was rocking her as we walked all the way to the burial site. And the wonderful team, Tracy, Lisa, and Adrian, all met us there. And they just let us do our thing, say our thing. They asked me, do you want one of us to put her into her grave, or do you want to do it? And I wanted to do it. So I did that. I knelt down and I placed her into the grave, placed her back into the earth. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. Beautiful and painful, all at the same time. And I said my words, which are going to remain sort of between me and my family. And then Jordan said his words too. And he spoke in Māori. And I felt like the ground shook beneath my feet. It was so, so beautiful. Some that he translated for us, and some that will remain between him and his daughter. And it was, the most profound and beautiful moment of my entire life. And then we took the dogs for a little walk around Green Acres. And then we came back and we sprinkled some more flower petals over her grave. We said goodbye for now. And then we left. And that was the second time that I had to leave her. And it was profoundly, profoundly painful. But I knew that her spirit was always going to be within me. I knew that my lioness heart had been activated through my daughter, whose name, Ngākau Raiona, means lioness heart. It was just wonderful. was a wonderful experience, and one where the grief is still real. I'm still feeling it every single day. But I suppose in the last few minutes of this podcast, I should share what life's been like on the other side, because we typically end at the funeral in these stories and in the way that we as society treat those who are mourning. But that grief doesn't stop there. And I think for me, it was acknowledging that this grief is lifelong. In fact, I started back with my clients, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks after her, maybe 1 week after her burial. I just started gently easing back in with a few clients. And one of my first clients, David, he said to me, I'm so sorry. This is a pain and it's a loss that you're going to feel for the rest of your life. And for a lot of people, they'd be thinking, well, oh my goodness, don't say that. But it was the most validating thing, because I knew that. I'd already integrated that. I'd accepted that. I'd accepted that on the days that were starting to feel a bit more normal, that my heart still hurt. And even today, just before I recorded this podcast, I was in town. I do consultancy work for big corporates. And as I was on the tube, I was sat there meditating and I just felt it. There's just a pain. There's a longing that will always be there. Does it always feel as raw? No, of course it doesn't. But it's always there. And for me, and I always talk about this, my grief is a tattoo on me. It's lifelong. And with that is an acceptance, but also an acknowledgement that my grief is a beacon of my love for my daughter. Every time I feel that beacon of my love for her roaring within me, or purring, sometimes it's just in the background, it's profoundly beautiful. And it brings her into my mind. And I love talking about her. I love crying for her. I love it all because I love her with all of my heart. So I'm going to close out this episode just by putting my hand to my heart again. And I close every episode with a note to self. And in my note to self, I want to honor my daughter, and I want to honor anyone who you're grieving, because no matter how everybody around you seems to move on, no matter how others leave their names unspoken, the names of those who you love so unspoken, those who are grieving, they matter and they exist. And with that in mind, I wanted to finish with a note to self that I wrote. And my notes to self actually started through my journaling. It's why I have them at the end of each episode. And these notes to self have been profoundly healing and powerful for me to refer back to. Sometimes they are the reminders that I need to know on any given day in my grief, because my grief is still here, it's still raw. And actually, if I think about it, on Mother's Day that's just been here in the UK at the time of record, it was last weekend. That was painful, because I am a mother to a daughter who, from anyone else's perspective, is invisible. They don't see her. But for me, she is visible because she is in every fiber of my being and every second of my day. So here is my note to self that I wrote in the journey forwards in my grief of my daughter. I wrote that no matter what anyone says, doesn't say, or quickly steers the conversation away from, she exists. Ngākau Raiona not only lived, but she lives on within me. So say her name loud and proud. And if you're navigating your own grief journey, at whatever point you are in your grief journey, because this grief is lifelong, baby, know that I'm here. Death on the Daily is always here. And there is so much connection and compassion that we can find through sharing in these conversations and in these stories. And wherever you are in your journey, know that I'm here and I'm sending you lots and lots of love. All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula,
including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more dead conversations, and in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something